All right, Tyler, I know we talked a little bit before, but still, can you like introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Tyler Goldstein. I am currently the applied biomechanist for the Miami Marlins. As we were just talking, my background is in basketball biomechanics. So I have dabbled in both basketball biomechanics at P3 Sports Science in Santa Barbara. And now I'm currently with the Miami Marlins, but also have like a pitching biomechanics company that I work on as well, that's located back in LA.
Nice, nice, nice. So, uh, I know we kind of talked a little bit before, but still, what got you into the whole biomechanics world?
Yeah. So I actually grew up thinking I wanted to be an S&C coach and cold emailed P3 Santa Barbara and was like, "Can I just come shadow?" when I was still an undergrad at UC Santa Barbara. And they were like, "Of course, come shadow." So ended up working as an S&C there, and I saw their biomechanics lab, and that was kind of the first time I was introduced to biomechanics, and I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. I remember the day specifically was like Adidas basketball was there, and they were using biomechanics to customize certain shoe types for specific icon athletes, and I was like, this is awesome, and this is exactly where I want to be.
Nice, nice. So, um, I guess my following question is, I mean, P3 been doing this for a long time. Baseball been doing this for a long time. Hockey are kind of catching up. I don't know about football, but in your experience, like working in P3 and now in pro baseball right now, like what are the difference in terms of testing when we talk about biomechanics testing between basketball and baseball?
Yeah, I think it's funny you say like basketball being like or baseball being a forerunner because we in baseball look a lot to golf. So golf is kind of the forefront of like what we're modeling all of our stuff after. But I think ultimately the testing, we're trying to accomplish the same thing, right? Like there's two avenues we look at for this testing is injury risk minimization and performance enhancement. So how can we minimize risk of injury and how can we develop athletes to become just better at their craft? And I think ultimately those are the two goals from both sports. But I think how we get there is different. I think a lot of the standard injury screening is probably relatively similar with just looking at mobility aspects, strength limitations. But as far as like the actual biomechanics, I think, and something that is maybe a little similar is they're both, we have to account for the total kinetic chain versus like, I think basketball is a little bit more, how I would say, more like hitting, where it's more reactive. Versus pitching is kind of like a free throw shot where it's a static movement and we can analyze without the perception action coupling component.
Nice, nice. I love it. I love it. All right. So before we talk about basketball even more, let's talk about baseball. So, like I said, like uh baseball been doing this for like what, 10, 15 years. Talk to me about like how baseball implement like biomechanics testing and biomechanics lab into like their maybe their daily routine, weekly, or like what is it like?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's I will talk a lot throughout this podcast of like different avenues, but I think there's one where you have like the lab-based testing where we go to like the drive lines and the treads and you get that one-off assessment. And then you have the teams, whether it's collegiate or professional, who do like the have a Kinetrax or a Thea system in their stadium. So we're able to kind of ask different questions. And I think ultimately it's like, what question are we trying to ask? And I'll start with just like if we have a pitcher and we're like, how what does he do really well to generate his velocity, especially when we have a major league pitcher? Like he's made it this far for a reason. So what does he do really well? And I think we can see that from both the lab setting and we can see that from an in-game setting. And I think the question we're asking is like you said, we baseball's been doing this for about 10 to 15 years. We kind of have, and we still don't know a ton. We're still learning, but we do know generally from a pitching standpoint, like what contributes to velocity. So we know like typically more rotation, more lead knee extension velocity, a better lead leg block. All those things are just components that contribute to throwing harder. But I think it's so important with these assessments to dive into what is important for this player. Like we know globally what typically matters, but what matters for player A is going to probably not be the same for player B. So I think that's where we use biomechanics to really, yes, we want to target weaknesses, but we also want to enhance strengths. And we can use the biomechanics data to really understand what is this player doing well, and then how can we pair that. And this is kind of a tangent, but I think biomechanics is pretty useless without motor learning component of it. Because we have to, I think a big problem in biomechanics right now is we go to these labs and we just get tested, and then our high school and college athletes are getting handed a piece of paper of their elbow flexion and they're like, what does this mean? So I think we need the like then what component a little bit more. And I think that's where teams do a really good job. And there's certain facilities like the drive lines out there that are great at that. But I think ultimately it's like we all want to tap into biomechanics. We just have to make sure we're doing it in the right way.
Hmm. All right. So in terms of doing it in the right way, you have to have like the right testing, uh, right understanding of the data, how you interpret the data, and how you train after the data, how you train the athlete. So, let's start with the testing first. Uh, Usually, like, do do most of the pro team have their own pitching lab or not?
Most actually think that, not sure, but I think the answer to that is probably half of them. Most pro teams have the in-game Kinetic system at their stadium, so we're able to capture like in-game. I don't know how many teams have the system plus a lab.
Oh, okay, okay.
So
So,
that stuff is primarily like MLB, from what I know, is more like in-game action items compared to like one-off lab setting tests.
mm, so in terms of like training. If we want to change something in terms of like their pitching mechanics, do you guys use uh the lab data or the in-game data more?
So a combination of both. Like if we have a pitcher, let's say who we want to increase hip shoulder separation, we'll have him throw on the game mound and get that data to like validate, okay, are our cues actually translating to increasing the target that we're trying to increase? So we can use our game like system in a lab based setting to answer those questions to see like, is what we're trying to accomplish being accomplished? And then I think ultimately it's like, is our drill and is our cueing correct? And that's where like I bring in the motor learning component, is like biomechanics without motor learning is just one piece of a big puzzle.
That's where like baseball been talking about what's the term? I forgot the term, but baseball been talking about motor learning for a long time.
Like skill acquisition,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. All that for a long time. So, all right, switch topic. I want to talk about injury prevention or like injury mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about how you guys feel about injury mechanism in basketball world. Like in the past few years, we've been talking about ACL injury mechanism, Achilles tendon injury mechanism, but like I think in the like at least last start from last year, like people started to realize like, all right, this is an injury mechanism, but what are we gonna do about it?
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot we can do about it. So, uh, what about baseball? Like you got UCL, oblique strain, or injury. Like, um, let's start with the injury mechanism for UCL.
Yeah. I think ultimately the UCL is meant to withstand about 34 Newton meters of torque. Baseball pitchers are going through up to 180 Newton meters of torque. So the amount of stresses that we're placing on the UCL during a pitch, like the UCL is not meant to withstand that amount of force. So it's almost like how you said the basketball injury, there's only so much we can do. Like I do believe with the UCL there is ultimately something we can find as not a solve, but at least minimizing the risk. And I can touch on some of my ideas, but I think pitching is just putting you at a higher risk for those injuries, like a basketball ankle sprain. Like when you land on someone, you're at a higher risk when you dunk and come down on someone or go up for a rebound. Like baseball is kind of the same, and same with like an oblique strain. Like if your rotational forces as a hitter just exceed your eccentric ability to decelerate that rotation, like it's a violent swing and you're probably going to be successful, but we do come with those injury risks. And I think there's better ways than like elbow valgus torque to measure it. I think for now, that's the best proxy we have. And actually, Kevin Giordano and Gretchen Oliver put out a really good paper last week about just kind of saying that elbow valgus torque is what we've seemed to measure as the risk for injury, but like, is that really solely the metric we should be looking at? And like, I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, I think ultimately we are objecting ourselves to these high force positions and being a pitcher. And as I'm sure like you've seen a ton of like, but we're throwing harder than we've ever thrown before, meaning we're placing more stresses than we ever have before. So it is just a kind of a product right now of just the way the game is moving, and acquiring much better talent.
Hmm. All right. Since you brought up pitchers are throwing harder than they ever been before, the output's higher than ever. It's kind of the same with every other sport, right? And every like all of us are dealing with like higher injury rate than like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Um, this is me thinking like most of the time, like most athletes, they've probably been training harder than ever. They're lifting heavier, the output is higher. Do you think that this is just random question, but like maybe our body wasn't supposed to handle those stress? Uh, maybe we're not built to handle those type of output.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, maybe. And I think with these increase you said in the weight room, and like strength training is amazing, and I think we should be doing it from a young age. But I think like for example in baseball, everyone now has what's called a Trackman, and a Trackman tells us basically all of our pitch metrics, so how fast we're throwing. And you're starting with kids in middle school chasing velocity from such a young age instead of learning how to pitch. So we're missing like, we have our metrics and we're so analytic driven. And like I'm in biomechanics, so I'm a proponent of analytics and biomechanics, but I think we need to go back to teaching the kids to throw and be athletes versus we have these high school and well middle school even kids just chasing velocity from the time they're 12, and we're putting our bodies aren't built like you mentioned to adhere to stresses like that, especially at that point when we're probably not lifting heavy in the weight room, we're just being exposed to weight training. Like our bodies just aren't equipped to handle forces like that.
Hmm. And another thought like kind of correlate with uh the paper you said Dr. Oliver Gretchen put out last week is this is probably stupid, but uh a lot of the commercial like movement assessment system, not say FMS, but like a deeper dive like physical therapists often use SFMA or like uh maybe some of the PT use Gray Institute to like break down movement like joint by joint or break it down on table. Um, do you think there's value in that? And like in terms of like checking like assessing high-end athletes, and like, and a lot of them are gonna say like maybe it's their thoracic spine, maybe it's their pelvis. Like, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I am a total proponent of like full body screening, whether that's, yeah, FMS style or like just a typical mobility scan. And just, I think it's one, super important to understand how the body moves or how the athlete moves when we're trying to intervene. And two, I think, especially in like, I'll say baseball pitching, for example, if I have a pitcher who can't physically get into positions that I'm trying to get him into, I'm wasting their time and I'm wasting my time. So I think we can kind of start to see like, if I want a pitcher to have more an open stance, but he lacks a ton of hip external rotation, and I see that in the mobility screen, I probably, my theory would be I would address it for 4 to 6 weeks, see if I'm moving the needle at all. And if I'm not, I'll be like, you know what? That's probably an anatomical limitation that he has. And now let's just accept that and train around it. So I am a big proponent of assessment batteries that include some sort of like FMS style screening because I think it allows us to better evaluate and program for the athlete.
Nice. So when you do your maybe like when you do your testing, is that one of the component you would do?
Yep. So I do a typical for my company, core pitching. We do like so we'll do 3 parts of the assessment. So we'll start with just a mobility screening, like PT style, just manual rotation of the hips. We'll take some shoulder rotation. We'll look at some thoracic extension, um, things like that. And then we'll do a strength screening. And there's 2 things I like to look at with the strength screening. We use a Vald force frame and we'll look at like peak force of the lower extremities as well as, I know this is controversial and I'm still not sold on it, but I think rate of force development is super important. I've yet to see something that accurately measures it in a sense where I'm like, that is that is the answer. I think we're getting closer. I just think our technology, our ideas might be ahead of what our technology can actually support. So, oh, sorry about that.
You get
Let
it, you
me
get it.
turn the light back on. But I think um, just getting a full understanding. So I don't think when we do a biomechanics assessment, I don't think it should be limited to motion capture. Like I think it
Mm.
needs to include the functional movement screen. I think it needs to include some sort of strength assessments because, like I mentioned before, like if we're trying to get athletes into positions they physically can't get into, we're wasting our time.
Yeah, nice, nice. Um, I think 2 years ago I was fortunate enough to visit Wake Forest pitching lab.
Amazing.
Yep, yep. And the way they do it is like they have pitchers or they have baseball player like pitch or try to hit the ball. And after like I forgot how many times, but after that they break it down on the table, do like traditional like SFM. I'm not sure if it's SFM, but like traditional PT assessment, movement assessment, and then break it down on the table. And
Yeah.
after that I was like, yeah, this is how we should do things, right? So talk to me about like we talk about like your work in baseball right now. You were at P3 before. Talk to me about like what we can learn from baseball, what basketball guys can learn from baseball.
Yeah. I think ultimately a couple of things come to mind. First, and this is kind of super niche, but in both sports, like wrist action is important. And I think in baseball, and we're still limited, like we are with the rate of force development, we're limited by the technology and its ability to capture high speed movements of small joint areas. And, but I do think baseball is on the right track to really being able to look at like wrist movement, radial ulnar deviation, things like that. And I think that's something that is important in basketball. And you can probably start by looking at some of the literature in baseball on like systems that are best at capturing that and just different ways. I know the movements are different, but it's ultimately important for a shot of where our wrist is lined up and important for a pitch. So I think using some of the advancements that baseball has made in like the wrist and hand positioning could be a cool place to start exploring for basketball.
Hmm. All right. This is interesting. Um, I mean, for baseball, you're throwing like what, 95 miles per hour, 100 miles per hour. And basketball, like they don't, I don't think they, maybe I'm wrong, but like a lot of players don't even focus on the wrist. But like as a biomechanist, why do you think the wrist movement is important?
I think it's the most distal segment between what the object we're releasing and the transfer of everything up the chain. Like as we talked about before, it's a total connect, both sports involve entire kinetic chain movements. So I think the more efficient we are proximally in the chain, the better we can produce distally as the last attachment from the object and the body.
Hmm. I like this idea. I like this idea. So, let's dive a little bit deeper into the biomechanics testing and whatsoever. Uh, Back when you still at P3, do you guys use marker base or markerless?
When I was there, we were marker based. I believe now we have
Yeah,
switched to markerless.
yeah, they did.
They did, yeah.
Yeah.
It was, yeah. Oh my gosh, it was crazy marker based. Especially, I actually, this is kind of a tangent, but went out to Wake Forest with one of our. I did my master's degree at USC, and I went with one of our PhD students to collect baseball data, and we did baseball pitching marker data. It was crazy the amount of markers you put on. But back in my P3 days, we would put on all the markers.
So, the following question, how long did it take for you to like, you need, how long did it take to put on all those markers at like, for baseball, how many, for baseball, like when you collect the data at Wake Forest, how many markers you put on? And for P3, how many markers you put on?
So baseball and Wake Forest, and this was like a PhD research collection. So it had to be like the extreme end. I think it was 72 markers. P3, we only looked at lower extremity stuff, which is something that I hope eventually like would like to have some sort of like I don't know if it's back with P3 or some partnership or something, but I would like to look at like total body because I think trunk movement and like energy leakage at the trunk is super important. So I hope that's something that we can ultimately do together in the future. But they just looked at lower extremity stuff, and that was a maybe a 25 marker set. It was quick, and it's funny because everyone says like marker base is the gold standard, right? But it's if you have different people placing the markers every time, we're probably looking at as much error as a markerless system here.
Really?
Yeah, because you have to hit the anatomical landmarks, and there's some that are easy, like you have your greater troch, and those are easy to palpate. But when you're looking at like medial and lateral or epicondyles are easy, but like if
Oh
we're looking
yeah.
at, yeah, epicondyles are easy, but like there's certain like if you put it on a different spot on the heel, like you're gonna get a
Oh
different
yeah.
foot segment.
Yeah.
Like it's just you have to, and we P3 did a really good job of like really going through intense training to be able to place the markers. A lot of like palpations and anatomy lessons, which was great. But yeah, I do think that I don't know if I agree with uh marker based motion capture being like a ground truth, to be honest.
All right. This is gonna be a little nerdy, but whatever. Um, so like I came from like SFM background, especially like really familiar with almost all the movement assessment. Um, do you, in your experience, does marker base able to track like transverse plane movement or like uh yeah, are they able to track transverse plane movement?
Yeah, definitely. I think the biggest limitation, at least for like baseball, for example, of transverse plane movement is we are just moving faster than the cameras can actually capture. So I think whether we're using markerless or marker base, we still have that limitation of we're capturing at 300 hertz, but we're moving extremely fast. And the cameras, like, again, I think our ideas are ahead of where the technology is.
I like this. I like this. What about Mark? Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, makes sense. So,
Yeah.
uh, uh, how long does it take for you to put on 25 markers?
It took like 15 minutes, and you would just have the athlete. I felt so bad. You'd have the athlete just standing there after they warmed up, and you're putting on all the markers, like, and then you'd put one on wrong, and you'd have to rip it off their skin and put another one. I felt so bad.
And it was
But
forever. It's like forever for basketball player.
yep, every basketball player. And P3 is very like renowned in basketball. So we had some top dogs in there, and like they're just standing, like they warm up, they're in like waiting for all these. Yeah, it was pretty funny. It was,
Nice.
but P3 is amazing in basketball, and I know they do some sort of like consulting with the league, as far as I know, that league wide biomechanics deal, um, that everyone in
Hmm.
basketball is now partaking in. I know they have some sort of part in it, but they
Yeah,
did.
they're still trying to figure out like how to do it. Like, yeah.
Launched
So,
in 2024, right? And now
yeah.
it's still, yeah.
So, all right, talk to me about like your own pitching company. Like you
Mhm.
say, like you do movement assessment, some type of strength assessment. What's after that?
Then we do, so we, there's three kind of things. We do a movement assessment, we do a strength assessment, and then we'll do a biomech assessment. So my idea with starting the company was two things. One, I felt like a lot of labs you go to just hand you the piece of paper. And like I mentioned, their athletes in high school are seeing, oh, my shoulder abduction was 100 degrees. They're like, what is shoulder abduction? So my thought with creating this company was kind of bridging that gap, especially in high school and college athletes. I would give them specific intervention programs into their pre-throw routines. I'm a big believer in like the PAP, post potentiation activation, and I really like to, especially guys who are weak in like hip abduction strength, knowing that that is something pretty important in baseball, or lack glute hip extension strength, so weaker glutes or something. I would like to like program them some sort of PAP in the morning or pre-throwing to kind of get those muscles firing and ultimately help to improve hopefully velocity. So my first target there was to kind of give them the then what. So we do the assessment, we give them the report, and then we give them an intervention program. So that ranged everything from pre-throw was consistent for guys in high school who didn't have, would go to the gym and just do bicep curls. We'd give them like a full strength program, mainly just like posterior chain development, some very typical. And then we'll intervene like with their pitching coaches of like, oh, we think this guy could benefit from increased hip shoulder separation, or his sequencing is off. So we'd intervene with their pitching coaches. So it kind of gave the then what. And then the second part of the company was going to labs is so expensive. So I think it's a big barrier for athletes who really do want to get better. And so my quality of assess biomechanics, like I was using uplift motion capture. Not, I mean, no disrespect to uplift, but nothing compared to Kinetrax. So or Thea or any like semi motion. Like it's not, it's a 2D based system. Like it's, but I thought it was reliable enough to, and our database was super large where I was kind of able to, even if the numbers weren't completely representative of the actual value. Like I was kind of able to see like what changes the athlete was having, and then compared to the rest of our population of like 100 plus athletes, kind of where does he stand in this metric. So I wanted to do one, something that gave an intervention, and two, something that was affordable. And it was more of like a we come to you. So you don't have to come to a lab. We'd go down to like Orange Lutheran High School in Southern California and test their whole team. So it was more, it was easier for them. But I think next step is I want to build like my own internal biomechanics model, like inverse kinematic model, to be able to use like broadcast video or something else to, instead of like uplift, have our own internal algorithm. So that's the next.
Nice, nice, nice. I love it. I love it. So, obviously, like having more testing data or having uh, more athletes to test will help you more understand like how it works or how this whole thing is gonna work. So this might sound stupid, but like everybody's been talking about like in baseball, everybody's been talking about like elbow, shoulder, maybe thoracic spine. Uh when it comes to like UCL injury or like shoulder injuries, do you guys talk a lot about like the pelvis or yeah, pelvis, spine?
100%. I think a lot too that we'll talk about is the ground reaction forces and the ground foot interaction. Because as I've said a ton, like it's an entire kinetic chain movement. So it's starting from the ground up. So, in my opinion, like, and something I do in my company and my whole programming approach is that we our elbow and shoulder are going to exceed the thresholds that they're meant to. But if we can disperse the forces, especially in the lower extremities, much better, we can at least place less force and disperse it throughout the body better. So I think ultimately, like, yes, pelvis orientation matters. I think ground foot interaction matters. I think I like when I'm doing an analysis on a guy, I'm starting from the ground up. Even if it's like this guy has a shoulder injury, I'm starting from how does he contact the ground? What is his pelvis orientation? What is his trunk flexion? How is he placing more stress on his shoulder? So just working back from I don't think like the oftentimes like the injury in baseball and pitching like isn't a product of like it's not a shoulder injury. Well, it is, but it's not coming from a poor mechanics of the shoulder. It's coming from something lower in the chain that's resulting in higher stresses at the shoulder.
Nice, nice. So, stupid question, but will you guys look at like their, like you said, like, uh, would you look at their ankle mobility, calcaneus, eversion, inversion, tibia femoral rotation, all that stuff?
Yep, 100%. I in like a quick screening, I would primarily just look at like inversion, eversion, and dorsiflexion, or like I would just do like a knee to wall test to get like mobility. And oftentimes we see like players, if they have the range, they go through it. So I think another big thing too is like developing strength through the entire range of motion that we have. And I know that's like your area of expertise, but it's like I think a lot of these young kids, especially as they're more plastic and we're able to change mobility and we're adjusting positions, it's like if you have the range, you typically go through it. And we only, at a younger age, I feel like we're training in such constrained ranges instead of getting strength through that whole range. So, like, as I'm trying to program a guy, let's say I want to open up his stance a little. So, I want to give him more hip external rotation. I will also program him strength exercises. So we're not only developing like the range, but we're getting strength to withstand the forces through that range.
Mm, mm. Um, Earlier we kind of talked about like asking the right question so we can know like what should we do in terms of testing, what kind of data, like uh what kind of data we need to track. So go back to like basketball. With all the injury going on, like we probably need to ask more specific question about like what should we do. So from an outsider working with baseball, I mean you work with basketball before, but like what do you think what are some questions with you think we should dive a little bit deeper? And when it comes to like the biomechanics testing, like like what kind of movement do you think we should track?
To track. Yeah, I think one thing that we from like a I'll kind of do two parts of this. I'll do an injury one and like a performance one. But I think performance and something I was going to touch on earlier, as far as what basketball might be able to learn from baseball, is like energy flow and leakage at the trunk. So basketball being like a primary change of direction sport where that's important, like any extra leakage of energy can ultimately harm your transition into defense or offense. So I think P3 actually did a really good job of, and like I said, we didn't measure total body, so we did not do this, but they had a assessment where it was a slide, like a 5 yard, you change directions on the force plate, go 5 yards back. And I think that's a great assessment in basketball to be able to one, capture ground reaction forces of that change of direction, and then also we timed it so it was 100% effort, so they were able, like it was always like a competition, like beat your time, so the effort was there. I think the if we then paired that with like a total body kinematic model and we're able to look at, since we have the ground reaction forces and we can look at like energy leakage there, I think then we can start to really dive into training like dynamic trunk stability and things that are important in pitching and hitting, and ultimately going to make you a good basketball player from like a change of from a lateral movement standpoint. So I think that would be really cool from a performance standpoint of asking like the question being of like how does how does my trunk um like how does my trunk
Yeah, I
act
know.
change? Yeah,
Yeah, because
something
like
along those.
yeah, because there are actually like a few, I think a few physical therapists out there saying like a lot of the ACO is because they lack thoracic spine mobility. They lack certain direction of rotation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
No,
and yeah,
go ahead.
and like I do feel like some of the guys in pro sport do feel like we're talking about ACL, why are you talking about like so but coming from like a background of SFM, you definitely see that.
Mhm. Well, yeah, and I think when you're in it, you realize like it's a total body movement. All these sports are like it's not just like yes, your ACL is probably, oh my gosh, I'm sorry.
You good, you good.
My light keeps going off. It's a probably a product of something else that's occurring. Like it's not just that act, like your UCL tearing, it's probably, yes, the forces are exceeding the strain, or the stress is exceeding the strain that you can actually withstand, but something else is happening to get you to that point. uh,
Hmm.
so I think that would be something to look at in basketball from like a performance standpoint, and then from a motor learning standpoint, like how can we train that dynamic trunk stability to not leak energy in that frontal plane motion, I think would be super cool.
Hmm.
And I guess from an injury standpoint, I think, and I don't even know, like I feel like we spend so much time on like non-contact injuries, and I think from like I'm interested in ankle sprains, and I think ultimately looking at like ground foot interaction from like a drop jump would give good insight into like how do we contact the ground, especially from like do we roll from inversion to eversion, like are we going through a lot of that translation, do we land super plantar flexed and have to spend more time on the ground, like I think, and then I think training like ankle stability for guys who lack that would ultimately place them in a safer spot for when we're don't have a contact with another player, but even more so when we're coming down and land on someone's foot. Like we're already placing ourselves at higher risk for just that inversion to, or sorry, eversion to just occur, and I like a lateral ankle sprain. So I think if we can really train that ground foot interaction properly, we can probably place less risk, especially when we have that contact.
Nice, nice. I can't like this is a thing we maybe talk after recording, but uh um like you mentioned, like motor learning is a big thing. Um, do you guys like I guess no, actually baseball have been using a lot of different ways to like cue the athletes,
Mhm.
right? So I guess my question is with all these data, with all these testing, and with all the understanding of biomechanics, movement assessment, and motor learning, what else do we need to know? Or like uh what kind of question do we still have in terms of like understanding the whole human movement, pitching, hitting, or
Yeah.
injury prevention?
Um, I we think we know a lot more than we do in the biomechanics space. I think everything is still, you agree. I think everything is still super exploratory. And I think the way we'll get to where we want to be is by really asking the right questions. And I'm still not exactly sure what those right questions are. I think, like we said, there's two avenues. There's a performance enhancement or player development, and there's an injury risk. And I think ultimately, my primary interest actually shifted. It usually, typically was the injury risk, and now I'm really into the player development. But the injury risk is so important, and I think especially like Tommy John surgery in baseball is an epidemic. And I think like we spent so much time thinking elbow valgus torque is what is like causing these UCL injuries. And like I don't believe that. So I think we need to start asking like Dr. Lori Mishner, and now this is kind of becoming a thing, but looked at ulnar humeral joint gapping. So took an ultrasound image where one was a unloaded position. So shoulder was abducted to 90 degrees, elbow flexed 90 degrees. She took an ultrasound image of the gapping of the ulnar humeral joint gap, and then added a 5 pound weight. And I know that's not nearly enough to what the actual stresses are, but she was able to look at how big does the gap increase with just a small amount of weight added. So I think moving in that direction of like, we probably won't be able to see this with motion capture, but there are better ways to measure it. Like we need to measure like the strain that is occurring during the pitch. And until we can place two magnetic balls in the UCL and actually look at the strain, like we're looking at proxies. And I think like elbow valgus torque is a great monitor for workload, but I don't think I think we've spent so much time diving into these ideas that might not be the right questions.
All right. Last question. My mind is all over the place. This is too exciting for me. Um, um, you test a lot of athletes, baseball, basketball. Uh, I mean, s- this is probably gonna be stupid, but like, do you think scoliosis is like, I mean, scoliosis is probably gonna affect like rotation on one side and the other. Do you think that's a part of like maybe why injury happened? And do you think we should like address that somehow?
Yeah, I don't yeah, I do ultimately. Yeah. I think any like and that's why I think it's also so important to collect the medical history of the athlete before any testing, because you have to know these things. Like if I see an athlete with limited rotation to one side, not knowing they have scoliosis, I'm going to crank on the rotation to try and get them to be symmetrical on both sides, not knowing that they have a anatomical inefficiency that they can't. And yes, I do think that is something we should be addressing. But I think also just knowing, like I've said many times, like knowing the athlete, like in such a short session, and it's different. Like when you're with the team and you have access to the athletes for a full season, but when you're doing like one-off assessments, it's you have to learn as much as you can about the athlete. And that includes injury history and medical history to know like the scoliosis example of like what are these limitations that we're likely going to be seeing. Like in basketball, if I have a guy who's had a ton of lateral ankle sprains, like I'm probably going to see that in the biomechanics. And ultimately, if I don't know he had a ton of lateral ankle sprains, like I'm going to program differently than had I known this is like a prime target for him.
Nice, nice. That's all the question I have for you today. So for those who
Awesome.
are
Well, thank you for having
yeah,
me.
for all those who are interested in what we're talking about today, like where where can they reach out to? Where can they find the core pitching biomechanics?
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn. It's just Tyler Goldstein, and everything as my LinkedIn is linked to core pitching. I have my email and I think my cell phone number on there as well. And I love to make new connections. So please, if you watch this, reach out and let's connect and dive deeper into some of this stuff.
Nice.